Hello and welcome back to the stars, everybody. Today we're going to be going over 100 tips and tricks for Starfield. Now this, just like all of my 100 tips and tricks videos, is going to be more oriented towards newer players, but hopefully some more of the veteran players can also get some value out of this and maybe learn a trick or two that they didn't know. Tip number 1, changing the object's rotation speed. This one was a pain for me when I first got into the game, but you can change your object's rotation speed in your settings. If you do this, it will allow you to turn objects much slower, and you can place them a lot easier where you would like them to go. This is great for habitat building, as well as building in your houses that you may collect throughout the story. It saved me a whole lot of time and made it a lot less frustrating to actually place things where they need to go. Why the setting is this high to begin with, I have no idea, but it is nice to turn it down. Maybe it's not as bad on console. Tip number 2, you can reroll legendary effects, sort of. So long as you know that there is a legendary item within an area, there is always guaranteed to be that legendary item. This also works for rare and epic items too, and if you reload a save going into this area, it will change the effects on them. This can actually be really useful in the Mantis quest, where you can get an entire legendary set, so helmet, body, and backpack, and they're all guaranteed to have 3 legendary effects on them. This can be really useful if you're going for one particular set of effects, or if you're just trying to go for one particular thing. Me personally, I always try to go for carry weight on like my backpack because it's just the most important stat for me to have. For others, it could be any set of effects. Same goes with any sort of weapon. You might want a rapid pistol or something like that, and this is a way to get it, or at least to force it a little bit if you're okay with save scumming. Tip number 3, when picking your starting class, be sure to look more for the starting skills than anything else. Some of these skills are very important. I actually have a whole video dedicated just to the starting classes and where I would rank them. I would suggest that you check that one out, but there are a couple of skills that I would highly recommend from that, unless you're going into this purely from a role-playing perspective, in which case pick whichever one you would like. Tip number 4, one of the best traits that you can get is called kid stuff. This allows you to visit your parents. You actually get a lot from this, including a unique pistol that you're guaranteed to get from this, which is going to give you a huge advantage at the start, and armor and a couple other perks to go along with this, as well as the downside of losing 2% of your total money each week is not really that big of a deal. The money will only be a big deal really at the very start of the game, where you don't always have the most meds and don't always have the most bullets, but in exchange you are getting good armor and a good weapon out of it, so I think that really offsets the difference. Tip number 5, you can sell planet data to Vladimir up at the eye. Whenever you fully scan a planet, you are given the data from that planet, and if you take it back to Vladimir, he has about 20,000 credits that you can trade in at any given time, which can get you a huge amount of money, and a lot of these planets are very easy to scan. Tip number 6, unlike other Bethesda games like Skyrim or Fallout where you can pickpocket from the start, in Starfield you can't. You do need to have a perk for this. This perk is called Thief. I would recommend that you put 1 point into this on any build, because pickpocketing from certain NPCs is very, very useful during quests. It makes it so certain other options become available to you. Tip number 7, I would also recommend that you get the Boost Pack training perk. At least put 1 point into this. More points are also pretty good, but this perk in particular is probably one of the best perks in the game, as it allows you to actually use the Boost Pack on your backpack. This will just make it so you can get around to certain areas a lot easier, as well as to climb around and parkour way easier than you otherwise would. This is one of the best quality of life perks in the game, and I would recommend that you at least put the starting perk into it just so that you can use it. Tip number 8, often adding a suppressor to your weapon is the best option, assuming that you're going with the stealth perk. The stealth perk makes it so that anytime that you're using a suppressed weapon, you just get more damage. Suppressors honestly don't really come with much of a negative in this game, and it's usually in terms of damage that their negative is, so just going with stealth buffs your damage, and you're just getting more out of it in that way. So if you can throw a suppressor onto your weapon, you might as well, because it is a nice bonus. Tip number 9, if you need early weapons or early gear, I would recommend joining the UC Vanguard. It is one of the very starting areas that you can go to, and you can actually get quite a lot of gear from this, where they give you a starter loadout with some equipment, some meds, some bullets, and a gun of some sort. These are always random. The gun itself is always random. The ammunition should correspond with the gun. That's not random, otherwise that would be really weird. But having that little bit of a bonus at the very start can get you actually quite a lot, especially if you're already playing on New Game Plus. A lot of the time they'll just give you an advanced version of a weapon, and they'll give you mods for it as well, which is pretty good for the start. Tip number 10, you can always go and reuse the UC Vanguard's pilot training if you need to up your piloting skill, because any ships that you actually shoot down during the test will count towards any sort of perks that need those type of damages or just destroying so many ships, like piloting. This can be very useful. It also means that there's no risk to your ship whatsoever, so you won't even need to be using supplies on it at all. You can just keep going back and doing this as much as you would like. Tip number 11, be sure to grab all the Mantis gear early on. The Mantis gear you can get from a quest. You can get this quest by finding notes that are on dead spacers. This will be referring to the Mantis' lair, and if you go there, then you are guaranteed legendary equipment. specifically legendary armor, as well as a ship and a lot of weapons that you can find along the way. It is a very good quest that you can do early on, and it will carry you quite a ways into the game. When I did this quest the first time through, I was about level 10 to 12. I'd recommend that level, or maybe up to level 15, because some of the enemies can be a little bit tough. And then I kept all this armor and most of the gear that I found there until like level 30 or 40, so it stuck with me for quite a while. The ship itself is also one of the best ships that you can get, better than your starting ship, and this is a free ship, so you might as well add it to your fleet of ships, I guess. Tip number 12, lockpicking. You do need to have a perk for lockpicking in this, as well as you do need to have digipicks in order to unlock any sort of area that is locked. So putting 1 point into security, I would definitely recommend. More points into security can also be really good. It's probably one of the better perks that you can grab right at the start too, because a lot of the time in this game there is actually really good equipment that is hidden behind locked areas. Tip number 13, when lockpicking, you only ever need to use up 2 of your lockpicks on any given situation. This goes all the way up to master locks, where you can solve every single lock in this game with just the aid of 2 moves. If you can identify those moves, and the way that I find this to be easiest is just to count the amount of empty spaces there are, then try dividing that by 2 and see how the easiest way to do it is. So if there's 4, that means you probably have a 2 and a 2, or you have a 3 and a 1 that you can solve this with. That works on every single lock that I've found so far in this game, and it just makes it so I don't run through digipicks nearly as fast. Tip number 14, the cutter has unlimited ammo, so you might as well use this quite a bit at the early game. The cutter is one of the very first weapons that you're going to get, and you can do pretty good damage and pretty good damage per second with this. We'll talk about it a little bit more in some of the other tips, but you might as well always have the cutter on you. You probably shouldn't have multiple cutters on you though, because they do weigh a decent amount, and they're really not worth the money to the weight, so I would just recommend other weapons if you're going to pick them up. Tip number 15, the final rank of the laser perk actually gets you a little bit more value than what it shows. Well, quite a bit with certain weapons like the cutter, because with the last level of lasers, all of your lasers have a 5% chance to light enemies on fire. This fire will deal % health damage to their total amount of health, which can make it so the damage actually racks up really quick, especially with the cutter, who can trigger this multiple times. These do stack. Stacking % health damages can absolutely melt through high health enemies. This isn't always the best against high level human enemies or humanoid enemies, because they can still tank through quite a bit of the damage since they just have natural damage resist to it. But certain enemies like terramorphs don't, and they just have huge amounts of health pools, so melting through them is actually really easy with this particular weapon. Tip number 16, Pluto has titanium. If you're looking for titanium, like I always am in this game, then you can always make a short trip over to Pluto in our own solar system. Pluto has a lot of titanium on it, and if you build a base there, you can harvest even more titanium. You will need perks to do this, but even if you're not, it's pretty easy to just walk around and harvest materials. This is one of the few times that I would recommend that you actually go out and harvest the materials yourself rather than buying them, because titanium is used for almost every upgrade in the early game, and it can be kind of annoying to not have them. Tip number 17, just like all these open world games, stealing is a pretty good way to make extra money. So whenever you see something that looks a little bit valuable and you can swipe it, then you might as well. You can sell it for a little bit more cash at certain areas. The pirates are willing to take just about anything, so you can always sell it there if you'd like, or if you'd like to use it as your own weapon, you can do that. Just know that if you do get caught with stolen weapons, they are going to take them away from you, and you are going to have to pay a fine with it, so that's kind of a bummer. There is a trick to get around that, and we'll talk about it in just a second in one of the later tips, so if you're interested in that, stay tuned. Tip number 18, contraband items and where to sell them. Contraband items are a little bit rare to find, but you can find them throughout the various solar systems that you'll go to. A lot of the time, pirates and mercenaries have these, and Neon really likes their contraband items. In ideal circumstances, you could just fast travel somewhere on the planet that you're already on and sell this to the Trade Authority, because they are willing to take contraband items at a discount, and that can net you a pretty good amount of money. For tip number 19, remember that the pirates will buy any sort of contraband. So if you're with the pirates or you haven't attacked the pirates so far, then you can always go and sell it to them. They'll buy any level of contraband or any level of stolen items, which can be very useful. Tip number 20, the perk research methods is probably one of the best perks to take early on as well, because this does save you materials in the long run. This makes it so you can get through the research section of all of your equipment that you need to actually upgrade much faster than you otherwise would. It's definitely a perk worth taking in the early game. Tip number 21, semi-auto weapons are almost always better than fully automatic weapons. This one is just a modded hint, more or less, where depending on legendary effects, you might want a fully automatic weapon, but assuming you don't have any sort of legendary effects, and the gun can go semi-auto, it's almost always better to go semi-auto. Semi-auto will get you the most amount of damage. It does better than basically anything else, with the exception of maybe the binary trigger on certain weapons, but it will be better than full auto, and it will be better than burst fire. Again, unless you have certain legendary effects on your weapons, or you just have an excess of ammo and you don't really care about it. Tip number 22, you can sell directly from your ship. Whenever you're at a merchant, you can go to the buy section, the sell, and then the sell from your ship, and you can just sell things that are currently in your ship's hold. This only counts for things that are in your ship's hold and not everything that is on your ship, which could be any number of junk items that you might have on there. So keep that in mind whenever you're at a shop. And be sure to check which menu you're in and not accidentally buying things or selling things in your inventory that you don't want to. You can always buy these back, which is nice, but it can be kind of a pain if you forget and then leave and then come back and have to buy them normally. Tip number 23, you can drop stuff inside of your ship. If your ship doesn't have enough space that you can hold things, you can always just drop things on the floor. That can be very useful, especially if there's still a lot of heavy loot that you would like to get from a particular area. Run back to your ship, drop everything you can, fast travel back there, fast travel back to your ship, drop everything, and repeat this until you just have all of the gear that you want inside of your ship. Then when you go to the next area, you can sell everything from your ship, place all this stuff inside of your ship, and then go and sell it as well. Tip number 24, when using your boost pack, assuming you're not over encumbered, you actually don't use stamina. This is really useful for retaining stamina while you're just running around on a planet. And this is typically what I do. Runaways, jump, and then use your boost pack 2 or 3 times so that you can get a little bit more distance. You can do this even more if you have more stats into the boost pack training. If you just have 1 into the boost pack training though, it will save you stamina in the long run, which can be pretty useful. Tip number 25. If you notice any sort of perk that is flashing inside of your options to pick perks, that means you can unlock the very next level of it. If it's not and it's more of a solid object, then you're still going to have to do whatever it takes to level up that perk in order to get the next level of it. Tip number 26. Certain weapons need to be charged up in order to get more damage out of them. Weapons like the rivet gun or the disruptor, you can actually charge up to get more damage out of them, or with the disruptor, make it so your EM charge is higher up and more likely to knock enemies out. So always be sure to check if a weapon can be charged up, that way you can do more damage. The rivet gun does more damage and has better accuracy as well as a faster moving projectile when it's fully charged up as opposed to it not being charged up. Tip number 27, there are 4 different weapon tiers, but only certain weapons can actually get up to various tiers. So you have base weapons, which includes all weapons, and there are some weapons that are just stuck at the base level. These would be the cutter, the rivet gun, and the arc welder. There is no upgraded versions of them. Next stage up would be the calibrated. These start appearing once you get some levels into your character and enemies can just have these. Then you have refined, where a couple weapons are actually stuck at refined as well. These being the Equinox, the Side Star, the Rattler, and the Eon. So any of those weapons can't go any further than a tier 3 weapon. Above that there is a tier 4 weapon that is called the Advanced. There is technically supposed to be a tier 5 stage of weapons in this called Superior, but they either aren't implemented correctly or they just don't show up in Starfield whatsoever. Although there is Superior Armor, so it might just be referring to that. It's very strange. But once you see an advanced version of a weapon, that is the absolute highest that it will go in terms of just weapon tiers. After that, you're going to have to look for things like legendary effects to make them better or upgrades to make them better. Tip 28, be sure to mod weapons if you can. Even if you're not building into the weapons modding skill, there's still some regular mods that you can throw on almost any weapon to get a little bit more value out of them. Whether that means making them a little bit more accurate, doing a little bit more damage, or just weighing a little bit less. I would recommend that you modify and play around with any of your weapons that you're using for a long period of time. Tip number 29, be sure to shoot barrels, pipes, and anything else that you think might explode. This can be pretty useful in a fight, not necessarily for dealing high damage to enemies, but there is a high chance that it staggers them and knocks them out of cover. In certain instances, you could even break things like the cryogenic vats, which make it so the enemy just gets frozen, and if they fall over, they're going to be a really easy target since they can't fight back anymore. Things like fire, enemies will try to get away from, and it will burn them a little bit, and explosions generally disorient enemies. Tip number 30, be sure to take quests in order to farm rare items. I found that this is probably the best way if you're looking for legendary items to actually get them, assuming you don't already know where legendary items are and you're just trying to reroll the stats on them. That is probably technically the best way, but if you're not doing that, you can always pick up quests like at the Rangers or at the UC Vanguard, and then just do those quests after you've completed the main quest and take on things like spacers or mercenaries or whatever. And a lot of the time they're going to have rare gear on them or rare gear in the vicinity. Tip number 31, certain weapons do use the same ammunition as one another, so be sure that you're not stacking all weapons that take the same exact ammunition. If you are, you're going to be kind of disappointed when you run out of ammo with one and run out of ammo with all of these. Make sure that you got a variety of weapons that take a variety of ammunitions. That way you're never completely running out and don't have an option during combat. Tip number 32. If a space fight gets a little bit too much for you, you can always try shifting power to the grav drive and then jumping away to a nearby solar system. That can be a pretty good way to get out of trouble in a pinch, especially if you're taking high damage or if you just see higher level enemies that you know you can't fight at the moment. Jump away and live to fight another day. Tip number 33. Don't be stockpiling junk. And what I mean by this is various miscellaneous items. Most miscellaneous items are not worth very much in Starfield, and they can weigh you down heavily. Even if you're putting this into your ship, it's probably not going to be worth the amount of money that you're going to be getting out of it. So just try to prioritize high value equipment. I'd recommend things like meds, weapons, specifically weapons, not tools. Tools can be pretty heavy. Sometimes armor and sometimes jetpacks. Whatever you see that's kind of rare or at least has a high value or a low weight to high value ratio, grab hold of those. They are going to be a lot better than just hoarding all the junk that you can have. Tip number 34. You can fast travel almost anywhere in this game. Outside of a few very specific areas, and so long as you're not overweight, you can always fast travel somewhere. It makes it so traversing the maps are far quicker, and especially getting through quests can be far quicker than necessarily getting up, running to your ship, undocking your ship, and then going somewhere else, and then actually landing on the planet. You can just fast travel right to the planet and then land on it wherever you would like. That is far, far quicker than it has been in most other Bethesda games. Tip number 35. You can build your own ship. In order to do this, find any sort of shipyard that you can on the map. There's one in Jemison, there's one in Mars, and then just talk to the engineer there and ask them to build a ship. In this, you can build onto your already existing ships if you would like, or you can build an entirely new ship out of ship parts. Just know that building an entire ship can be kind of finicky. It's probably time consuming, although it's very fun, and it's also going to cost you a lot of credit. So be prepared to pay for all of that. If you're like me, you end up building your ship in like one piece at a time and just have the bare basics on there and then build out from there. That way you can actually still have some money for paying for all the other stuff that you're trying to get. Tip number 36. The lodge has unlimited storage. If you go into the basement of the lodge, there are some containers there that don't actually have any weight limit on there. So you can stack as much junk as you would like in there. Whether it be weapons, armor, upgrades, whatever it is, just throw them right in there and then you can go and pick them up later. It's also very useful since the lodge basement has all of the facilities there so you can upgrade or research whatever you would like. Tip number 37, the scanner will show you the way. If you're lost and you have a quest equipped, be sure to flip on your scanner and then you should see arrows leading you wherever you need to go. This can be very useful if you get confused during a quest or if you're confused of how to get out of a particular building. That's where it's coming the most useful to me to actually figure out where the heck we're going, or if you wanted to actually click on a marker somewhere or place a marker somewhere on the map, you could at least see it on the scanner and then run towards that. Tip number 38. Remember that perks actually stack in terms of damage. So certain perks can stack multiple times on particular weapons. The Big Bang is probably the best example of this, where it does multiple damage types and can have multiple perks that help it, since it counts as a shotgun and as a energy weapon and as a particle weapon. Every perk that would affect those actually stack on top of one another. And this goes for every weapon type that can technically count for multiple damages, or for every perk that gets you something else. We talked about stealth earlier in this, where if you put a suppressor on it, you're just making the weapon stronger overall. Tip number 39, if you're trying to interact with stuff on your spaceship, be sure that you're within 500 meters. If you're further than that, then you cannot interact with getting any sort of loot or trying to board ships. So be sure to stay kind of close if you are trying to board different ships. Tip number 40, how to find the oceans and the ocean wildlife on planets. This one was frustrating to me when I first started playing the game because I didn't understand why I didn't find everything on the planet and I went to every biome. There is certain planets that have oceans and ocean life in them. In order to find this, be sure to scan the planet. Try to get as close to the shore as possible. It should say whatever the section is and then in parentheses coast. You can then go to the planet, and if you open up your map, you can just look for large flat areas. That is one way to find the ocean. I just found it a lot easier to just keep traveling in anywhere that said coast until I was actually visually next to the ocean and then walk down there. That is most likely where a lot of your missing resources in terms of wildlife will probably be on a planet. Tip number 41, be sure to use your companions as storage. If you have companions, even if they're just on your ship and not following you around, you can go over and talk to them and then just fill up their inventory with random junk that you have. I did this very early on because none of my ships held a lot of stuff, and just having them be pack mules can be fairly useful, especially if you need a lot of money early on. Tip number 42, shops reset every 48 hours. This is the UT time, not just the planet's time. So certain planets will be different than others. But so long as you pay attention to the UT time, it's every 48 hours, vendors will reset. This can be very useful for just selling them things or buying them things, whatever you might need. Tip number 43, ammo doesn't weigh anything in this game, so hoard as much ammo as you possibly can. If you see any sort of ammo just laying around, you might as well pick it up, because even if you don't plan on using it, you could always sell it later or just hoard it on your ship for a ton of stash if you would like. Tip number 44, medical items such as emergency first aid kits or med packs always heal for a total percentage of your maximum health, whereas food only heals you for a certain total amount of health, making it so that medicine is always going to be a better option than healing at everything except for maybe in the early game. You can get a whole lot more value out of meds, and I'd recommend that you be prioritizing meds over food in terms of actual healing. Tip number 45, be sure to set hotkeys to all of your weapons and any sort of meds or any sort of healing that you would like to have on your character at any given time. This also goes for space powers too. You have multiple slots here and you can fit multiple weapons on it. It's far easier to switch through these fast than it is to go into your inventory every single time to equip one weapon and pull it out. Tip number 46, food buffs of the same type don't actually stack on top of one another, even if they're from separate foods. They will just reset the other one. They'll just overwrite whatever the last food buff was that you had. So you can't stack multiple percent XP gain from foods. You also can't stack things like extra carry weight from foods. It's just going to pick whichever the last one that you had was. They can still stack if they're different ones though. So carry weight and XP gain can still stack on top of one another, just not XP plus more XP on top of that. Tip number 47, be sure to quick save a lot in this game. There is a lot of things that can go wrong in this, just like in any Bethesda game where you can sometimes fall through the floor, you can have enemies that just won't die, or enemies that just don't show up on the map, and having a lot of quick saves can be useful, just so that you don't have to redo huge sections too often. You should probably do hard saves pretty often though too, just in case you get into a bad spot where you're quick save and then you just end up dying a lot during that. Tip number 48, I'd recommend that you do the main quest up until the point where you can get space powers, even if you would like to explore and do side quests a lot. In a lot of these games, doing the main quest up to a certain point gets you a lot more things unlocked, and in this, I would recommend that you go all the way up to the point where you can unlock the various space powers. This just unlocks a lot of the map and a lot of the game in total, so it just makes the most sense to actually just get up to there, even if you're not going to go for the main story right away. Number 49, scopes get you more damage, so you might as well put a scope on your gun so long as you can. This is in reference to the sniper perk. If you have the sniper perk, you throw a scope on there, so long as you're using the scope, you get more damage with it. So having a scope and a suppressor on a weapon will get you even more damage like we talked about with stealth. Number 50, be sure to use chems to your advantage. You can stack chems on top of one another. This can be super useful throughout any point in the game, whether you're trying to persuade somebody, survive a situation, do a little bit more damage, potentially sneak around a little bit better. Be sure to take advantage of the chems that you have, and you could also potentially sell chems because they are probably one of the more high value to weight ratio items in the game, so be sure to grab them even if you don't intend on using them. Number 51, companions have unlimited ammo so long as they have at least one bullet. This can be very useful if you find a very strong, say, micro gun that can run through ammo very quickly if you're using it, but a companion won't. Give them one bullet and the microgun and they'll be set to go. They don't need any more than that. Tip number 52, be on the lookout for skill magazines. Skill magazines can be found all over the world, and if you pick them up, they give you permanent bonuses all throughout your playthrough until you get to New Game Plus. These can be super useful in terms of things like carry weight, or having certain weapons reload faster, or other weapons just have extra ammo. Tip number 53, be sure to track items that you need. You can do this at any sort of workbench, and this will just make it so that whenever you're interacting with items in the world, you can see a little magnifying glass on it, which you've marked in some recipe that you might need. Makes it really easy to remember what you're looking for. Tip number 54, EM weapons can knock out enemies. This can be pretty useful if you're going with a pacifist run, or if you want to charge up the disruptor. It can be pretty useful in sneak. It's not always the most practical in combat purposes, but if you are trying to go with that pacifist run or less than lethal run, you could go with the EM weapons too. Tip number 55, if you're a loot goblin like me, be sure to max out weight training. This is probably one of the best perks in the game for you. It actually has a really good tier 4 though, where it makes it so you can't be staggered as well, so even if you're going with a melee or an unarmed build, I'd recommend it. But aside from that, it just makes it so you have extra carry weight, and that is really useful in a game like this, because I like hoarding a lot of weapons so that I can sell them later, or just hoarding a lot of gear in general so I can have it. Tip number 56, you can clean stolen items. In order to do this, just go to a store, sell your stolen item, and then buy it back. Once you buy it back, this item actually won't be counted as stolen. So if you end up going to jail for whatever reason, you actually don't lose this weapon. It can be very useful if you find rare items that you want to steal, or it can just be useful if you find strong items early on into the game that you would like to keep. Tip number 57, be sure to pick up items in order to steal them. To do this, at least on keyboard, just hold E. This should be whatever your interact button is. You can pick up the item and then just walk it to another room or just out of the sight of NPCs. That way you can steal it and then you can have extra money from that. Tip number 58, gas planets are pretty much easy money. You can just go to a gas planet and then scan it and it will count as the entire planet being scanned. You don't even need to land at it. And then you can head right back to Vladimir and sell the data. It is probably one of the best ways to make a lot of money early on because it takes very little effort and you can do it super quick. Tip number 59, if you see a big red door like this or certain walls, these are actually breakable. If you see the pins there that say cut here, you can cut this open with the cutter or shoot them open with any sort of other weapon. I think you can also melee these as well. And once that's broken, the door will open. This also goes for certain frozen walls. If you hit them with a cutter or just any weapon, you can break them open and get through them as well. Tip number 60, always be sure to get well rested. This will get you more XP overall, although there is actually another bonus on top of this, where if you've already romanced a companion all the way to max, and then you sleep with them, you actually get even more XP. Normally it's 10% more XP from well rested. With the companions, it's actually 15% more XP. So that's pretty nice. Tip number 61, reading certain books unlocks certain landmarks. You can find all sorts of different books throughout the world, whether they're sold by vendors or just ones that you find laying around, and these can unlock certain unique locations that you can fast travel to. If you want to go see the moon landing, you can actually go there and see it, or if you'd like to head back to Earth and spot some other unique landmarks, you can do that. Tip number 62, you can mine asteroids just by shooting them. Asteroids usually have just raw materials on them, so if you see an asteroid belt around a planet, you can start harvesting these if you would like, and these all go right into your ship's container. Tip number 63, be sure to upgrade your ship's cargo. If you're like me and you like to hoard a lot of stuff and you like to have a lot of things, upgrading your ship's cargo is probably one of the most important things that you can do. You can do this at vendors or you can do this whenever you build up your own ship. Can be super useful, especially if you're like the ship that I have here that has about 7,000 carry weight. Makes it so I don't have to make too many stops wherever I'm going. Tip number 64, you can actually hide your spacesuit if you would like. This doesn't really do anything besides having cosmetic purposes, but if you would like to take off your spacesuit during any sort of planet that you're on that doesn't require a spacesuit, you can just toggle this option on and off if you would like. Tip number 65, during the Pirates quest, you actually get two unique items, two legendary items. The very first one is the Pirate's Revolver. This one is called the Keel Hauler, and it is probably one of the strongest handguns that you can actually get. So if you want a strong handgun, I'd recommend joining the Pirates. Tip number 66, you can also get a legendary rifle, and the legendary rifle is called the Revenant, and this one is probably one of the strongest weapons in the entire game. It has 3 really good effects on it, and it completely shreds through anything that's not really like a robot. Robots are not as strong against this. You can still melt through them pretty quick, but human enemies and alien enemies you can rip through very, very fast. Tip number 67, talking about unique weapons, you can also get the Deadeye Revolver from the Rangers. This one is obtained right at the very start of joining the Rangers, and it is just a unique Razorback. It doesn't actually have any sort of unique effects on it, no legendary effects. However, it is already modded, and the Razorback is just one of the strongest revolvers in the game, or one of the strongest handguns in the game. So grabbing this early is a pretty big advantage. Tip number 68, if you complete the Rangers quest, then you get 2 rewards. You actually get a unique rifle, which does pretty decent damage, and it's all around kind of nice to have. And you also get the Ranger ship, the Star Eagle, which is probably the best ship in the game, assuming you're not going with piloting and building your own ship, because it has just everything that you could possibly want into it. It's a Class A ship, so anybody can use it. It has high health, it has good shields, it has huge storage, it has good weapons. You can put different weapons on there if you'd like. It's a fantastic ship all the way around, and I would highly recommend that you get it. Number 69, Neon doesn't really care about contraband all that much. If you're going to the planet of Neon, it's probably going to be the easiest place in order for you to sell all of your ill-gotten goods, and get even more ill-gotten goods from stealing, killing, or whatever you would like there. Definitely the cyberpunk city, and I really like it for that reason too. Tip number 70, there's always free gear in the basement of the lodge, at least whenever you're starting a new game. This can be super useful because the weapons down there are usually pretty decent. They are randomized, so you might get something good, you might get something kind of average, but it is just free gear that you can always sell. This also goes for a couple other areas, like if you join the Rangers or if you join the Pirates, you can just go right to the back of any of their things that are hung up on the walls and just take them. They're not counted as stealing for whatever reason. Tip number 71, if you need some more quick cash, you can always get cargo hauling missions. All this is basically just fast traveling to the planet and landing on the planet, and you get money from that. It is one of the easier ways and one of the faster ways to make money in this game, especially if you end up not having to deal with anybody like pirates or anything. Tip number 72, there's 2 different types of crits. There's regular crits and there's sneak crits. Sneak crits always do more damage than the regular crits. In order to do a sneak crit, you just have to be hidden from an enemy or not detected by an enemy, and then shoot them or hit them with whatever weapon that you would like. This will deal extra damage to them, and where regular crits will always deal double damage, Sneak crits can do even more damage with that, especially with certain perks like concealment, making it so that you do massive damage with crits. Tip number 73, there are some unique clothings that you can wear, apparel that you can wear underneath, one of these being the pirate's outfit where you get 5% more crit chance, and it's probably one of the best clothing options that you can have. Tip number 74, the stealth suit is also one of the best options you can get. This is what you get from joining Ryujin, which is basically the Space Thieves Guild. This actually makes it so you're more difficult to detect, and it just kind of looks pretty cool. So I'd recommend that you get both of these if you would like to have some stronger clothing or some more unique clothing than just like 5 more stamina. Tip number 75, you can actually get the manipulation perk for free, at least the very first level of it. If you do Ryujin's quest, about 3/4 of the way through, they will give you the manipulation seal, so there's no reason to put points into that, at least right away. Tip number 76, remember that there's always multiple ways that you can do quests. Sometimes these can just be run and gun your way through, other times they can be bribery, other times they can be stealing, but there's almost always some other way that you can get through the quest than necessarily just using brute force. Brute force is generally a pretty good option though in my opinion, so take that with a grain of salt. Tip number 77, you can always rename your ship too. Whenever you go to build up your ship, you can rename it whenever you'd like. And speaking of that, tip number 78, you can also change however you look if you want. Simply go to Neon or another place that has cosmetic surgery and you can change your character to whatever you would like. Tip number 79, speaking about Neon, you can also buy a unique drug in Neon called Aurora. You can do this just at one of the nightclubs. One of the guys there always sells it, and this functions the same way that Jet functions in the Fallout games or Turbo works in Fallout New Vegas, where once you take this, then everything goes in slow motion. You can get addicted to this, which is kind of a downside, but if everything's moving in slow motion and you're moving a little bit quicker, you're definitely going to have the advantage during combat. Tip number 80, if you plan on surveying planets, be sure to take the first level of surveying. This is probably going to give you the most quality of life out of any of the levels to this perk, just because it makes it so you can scan things about twice the distance that you otherwise would. And without this, you basically have to be right on top of stuff just looking at it in order to scan it. So this is just a quality of life perk. You could max this out too, and it actually gives you longer zoom range than I think any sort of scope does, or about the same as the high-powered scope. So it does kind of come with that other unique advantage too. Tip number 81, if you don't know, you can holster your weapon. In order to do this, just hold in your reload button. Whatever that might be, your person will put your gun down. This can be very useful, especially if you're like me and you just like to skip through dialogue options on multiple playthroughs, or if you are tired of hearing the merchant talk about the same couple things every time that you go and talk to him. And this will make it so it's less likely that you accidentally just discharge your gun and shoot the merchant. Tip number 82, I'd always recommend that you buy resources whenever you're in towns. This is honestly a better way than actually harvesting the resources, unless you have outposts set up in order to get them. Most resources in this game don't cost very much, and they're also not super difficult to find at the right merchants, and you can just keep traveling back and forth between the couple of merchants that are on the map in order to get all of the materials you might need. So if you're out of titanium or adhesive or something more common like I'm always out of, always be sure to check the merchants. Tip number 83, be sure to loot everything. Boxes, crates, ammo boxes, dead bodies, whatever they might be. There's a good chance that you can always pick up something, especially if it's ammo or especially if it's meds. These either don't weigh anything or they weigh very little, and that can be really useful for just stockpiling a bunch of resources. Tip number 84, if you're looking for some rare weapons or weapons with legendary effects, you can actually buy a decent amount of these. A lot of merchants tend to sell these, and they will also be highlighted in a color that's either yellow for legendary, purple for epic, or blue for rare. This is a good way to get modded weapons and unique weapons early on, assuming that you got the credits for it. Tip number 85, be sure to set up outposts in order to get resources. We've kind of talked about outposts throughout this video, but if you do set them up, then you can harvest resources from them, and this can be a decent way in order to stockpile resources, especially if you need a lot of them. Tip number 87, always be sure to check out vendor upgrades for your ship too. Vendors do reset every once in a while, and this also goes for ship parts, so even if you don't plan on building your own ship, you could still upgrade things like the weapons on the ship regardless. That can help you out quite a lot. Tip number 87, sadly all melee weapons are basically the same, so just pick whichever melee weapon either you like the most, has the best effects, or just has the highest amount of damage, because every melee weapon in this game actually has the same attack pattern and has the same range as one another. Why they did that, I have no idea, and it makes it so melee is not a tempting option in this game to me, but it is what it is, so just look for whatever the highest statted weapon is. Tip number 88, if you're really missing out on a particular weapon or you want to know where something is, I would always recommend to check the wiki. There are plenty of Starfield wikis, and that's always what I did when I was looking for a particular rare weapon as to where to buy it from. If I knew its name but I didn't actually know where the heck it was, that made it so much easier for me. So always be sure to check out your wiki, and also thanks to the wiki for helping me out with this video. It does actually really help just getting some sort of resource on this. Tip number 89, you can actually focus the cutter's laser. If you hold in left trigger on a controller or right click on a mouse, this will make it so that your laser is more focused on whatever you're trying to hit with the cutter. And this will actually get you some extra damage, making the cutter a little bit stronger than it otherwise would be. You can also do this without actually firing the laser. The laser doesn't have to be needed to be fired to actually focus it right away. Tip number 90, if you grabbed a bunch of junk and it's on your ship, you can always jettison it out. This just throws it out into space and it completely deletes it from your ship. This can be really useful, again, if you ended up hoarding a lot of stuff by accident, even if you're not in the ship, which can be good. Tip number 91, always have mines/grenades on hand. There is an extra slot that you can just have mines or grenades on, and they're always going to be an advantage to everything. Even if you don't spec into grenades or mines, just throwing a grenade at an enemy can cause them to just flee away from it, and certain mines don't really need any sort of investment, like the cryo mines where you can throw them down. If enemies step across them, it can freeze them and you can get some free damage in on them. Tip number 92, be sure to keep in mind the planet's gravity whenever using grenades. Grenades are very inconsistent in this game, but that's because gravity is very inconsistent in this game. So if you're on a high gravity planet, you're going to have to arc these much more. If you're on a low gravity planet, you're going to have to throw these much straighter. Tip number 93, being overweight in this game doesn't actually mean that you can't move, or that you're even necessarily moving much slower like you would in other Bethesda style games like Fallout or Skyrim. But whenever you are moving with this, it makes it so that you will run out of stamina much faster than you otherwise would. So keep that in mind, and you do lose out on stamina even if you're using the jetpack for this, because it will still count as movement. Tip number 94, be sure to go out of your way to grab the different space powers in this. There's a lot of different space powers, and some of them can be super useful during combat. Other ones can be useful for just quality of life things. You can just have things like a force push that knocks enemies away, or you can become a space necromancer and res the dead enemies so that they will fight for you. There's so many different space perks, space powers that you can get, and it's really fun to test them all out. So I'd recommend that if you see a planet that has power on it, go there and grab it, because you're probably going to find something that's pretty fun to use. Tip number 95, if a merchant is completely out of money, I would just recommend that you buy their stock of ammo, so that way you can trade them more cash. Ammo doesn't weigh anything, and you're probably going to be using it, at least if you play like me and use a bit of everything. You could also just prioritize what you're actually using, and that way you're never running out of ammo, because merchant ammo does usually cost a decent amount, and it's a good way to just recycle weapons that you aren't really planning on using, or other equipment that you aren't really planning on using that you would like to sell. Tip number 96, be sure to put your food and meds away too. Food and meds actually do weigh quite a bit, or can weigh quite a bit, where there's been many times where I've been way overweight, and a lot of the time it's just because I've been grabbing a bunch of food and a bunch of meds and I haven't been using them, and I haven't put them on my ship. Tip number 97, if you're confused at where a merchant might be, like I was when I first started playing this game, you can see little markers on your star map where there is some level of civilization. If you go to that area, then you should be able to find planets that you've already been to and see if there is actually stores there. Like I said, this was difficult for me at the start of the game, but it does really help once you kind of get down where to go so that you can actually sell your gear. Tip number 98, you will always do more damage if you shoot enemies in the head. That shouldn't really have to be said in this, but you can also do extra damage if you shoot enemies in the backpack, which will cause their backpack to explode, and sometimes they'll go off flying and give you some really good ragdolls. Tip number 99, be sure to always talk to people around the cities. This is the easiest way to actually get different quests, different side quests, and different activities in order to do for the missions, especially if any NPCs have extra dialogue options that you can ask them about. Always be sure to go through with that just so that you can find more things to do. And then tip number 100, there's always New Game Plus, and New Game Plus is basically infinite. So if you would like to see all the possibilities play out, then you can keep doing this, as well as if you would like to have stronger gear, level up some more, go explore planets again, go explore other solar systems, build up your stuff. There is always a New Game Plus option for you. So never feel like you absolutely screwed up doing a certain mission type or with certain companions or whatever. New Game Plus is always available. And this was my 100 tips in Starfield. If you guys have any more tips, be sure to leave them down in the comments below. I hope this helped somebody out. I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Thank you guys so very much for watching this, and I will talk to you next time. Bye-bye, everybody!